Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wahine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hey everyone, I'm Ash and welcome to today's episode. Today I'm joined with Jess Maddox. Jess is an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media at the University of Alabama, where she studies content creators, influencers, social media platforms, and the tech industry. She is also the author of The Internet is for Cats: How Animal Images Shape Our Digital Lives. Welcome, Jess. I'm so looking forward to chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.
So before we kind of jump into some of the burning questions I have, what got you really interested in content creators, social media and the prevalence it's having?
Yeah, so I started grad school in 11 or so years ago. Oh, it sounds so far away now, but so it was like 2013, and it was around this time everybody was starting to realize you could use social media for business, not just for fun. And so I went to grad school actually because I thought I wanted to work in public relations. I thought I wanted to do social media professionally, and that had not been what my undergraduate degree had been in at university. And then I got into grad school, and I just all of a sudden realized I had all these burning questions about social media that were actually not public relationsy. And so I wound up writing my master's thesis on selfies, and then my dissertation was on memes and Instagram, and kind of like how and why images go viral. And then, of course, looking at any types of images always involves looking at creators and the people who make them and how they're affected by platforms that they're housed on. So that was kind of my roundabout way of winding up studying content creators and influencers. But since then, I've studied and I've interviewed probably close to 200, if not over 200 content creators in my career. I have talked to all types of creators and influencers, from veterinary influencers to pet influencers to book influencers. And I just love talking to people about what they're passionate about and what they're interested in, and how they see their role in this very rapidly changing media world that we live in.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because like that, I didn't grow up with social media or the internet the way we have it now. And it's just so funny to think of 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, the idea of being a content creator, that, it's just such a bizarre job that no one really anticipated. But I think you see that in the law has been so far behind catching up on that. I know in the UK, like in the UK, they brought in a lot of and I think you have it in the States as well, that, you have to put ads and brand partnerships and deals. But for so long, none of that was covered.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we lag everywhere, really. Lags far behind. Some countries lag much further than others, my own country included. The United States lags way behind many countries in the European Union, and countries in South America and East Asia as well, in terms of social media laws and regulations, because we unleashed this thing on the world, and then all of a sudden we're like, wait, we probably just shouldn't let this social media thing run around unchecked. And there's so many different aspects to it. There's the data aspect, there's the privacy aspect, there's the child aspect that I know we'll get into today. There's the advertising aspect, as you mentioned. And so to me, it always feels like, to use kind of a silly metaphor, we're building the plane while we're flying it. We live with social media every day, and we are trying to figure out how to regulate it now while it's actively happening and while things have already happened to people. And that's a bit of a problem. It creates its own challenges to try to regulate something that has just been unleashed on the world. And we don't always get it right. We don't always get it right.
I sometimes wonder, is it that we lag behind in terms of regulation on it because for so long, people just refuse to see it as a legitimate career and a legitimate way to make money on social media. So they were like, well, it's not a real job, so why do we need to regulate it like one? I don't know. It's
Absolutely. Even today, social media and specifically content creators and influencers are looked at as this very silly, frivolous, easy thing to do. And so I taught a class. So I teach at the University of Alabama, which is a college in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, in the US, where I live. And this past spring, so my spring semester would have been y'all's fall, I taught a class called, it was basically social media production. It was how to be a content creator and an influencer. And my students, are substantially younger than me. They're Gen Z, I guess, as you would say, 18, 19, 20 years old. And they understand that it's, difficult, that it's work. But then when they were actually even tasked to do it, they realized it was much more work than even they thought to do this. And so yeah, I think there's this belief that like the things we do for the internet aren't real or aren't like real labor or real work, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Again, in the nearly 200 people I've talked to in my career, just the amount of skills they have to manage. They have to do their own accounting, video editing. They have to be their own business manager. They have to be their own scheduler. They have to manage all of their stuff on their own. And eventually, if you get big and famous enough, you can start to outsource that to other people. But you got to get big and famous first and be able to pay all that out. So we are definitely up against kind of a cultural belief that it's not real work.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting because the younger God, I feel like I aged myself 20 years just by saying that. But younger generations they see it as a real legitimate piece of work. And I say that because my nephew is 8. And when I went back to Ireland last year and asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he told me a YouTuber.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's just wild to me that's not a fireman or doctor or whatever.
Right. I believe that's almost the case internationally. I know in the United States, and you mentioned Ireland, that if you ask like middle schoolers and high schoolers what they want to be, like content creator is up there in like the top 5 careers of what people want to be when they grow up. But yet, and that's one of the reasons I pitched and built this class that I did, is that there's this disconnect that, we're just like, oh, just go do it. But there's actually a lot of video editing skills. There's ethics to consider. There's coming up with your own brand of content and being consistent and learning how to use editing software and learning how to do all of these skills. So it was my goal with that class to hopefully kind of bring some awareness to the technical skills that actually go into these jobs. And even if students didn't want to become an individual content creator or influencer, they would still take a lot of those things into industries, running social media for somebody working in a public relations firm. Just the world is changing and we struggle to keep up sometimes.
Yeah, and as you say, even if you don't go into the content creation side, it's skills that are utilized in every single role. Like I'm not very active on social media, but in my job, I work in government and a lot of the stuff is putting comms out, how do we increase public awareness campaigns, and that all links back to social media, especially for young people.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm an academic, and even still, we're promote your work, like go to a conference on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, and like use the conference hashtag to talk to people, right? So it's just such a part of our lives. Like it's, again, to use another bad analogy that I always use, we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Social media aren't going anywhere. And we just need to figure out how to live with them smartly.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's why I'm really interested to pick your brain on this, because I don't know, was it maybe this year or last year, but the state of Illinois became the first US state to enact a law. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but this is so that children who are shown on social media must be paid for their work. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit what that's like, that law?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the US, the state of Illinois passed a law, I believe last July, so about a year ago, coming up on a 1-year anniversary of that said if children were in their parents' social media content and the parents were making money off the content the child was in, so either through the platform payout system like the YouTube Partner Program, or it's not called the TikTok Creator Fund. I think it's called the TikTok
Oh,
Creativity
yeah.
Program now. I should know that, but it's the TikTok Creativity something. Or so if they're paid from one of those platform payout systems, or if they're paid from sponsored content. So a brand has reached out to them and said, hey, we want to collaborate. We'll pay you X amount of dollars. The Illinois law says a portion of the proceeds that the parents make from that video must be put in a trust for the child to access when they turn 18 years old.
So it almost sounds like they're mimicking the child actor, with the Coogan account.
Absolutely, yes. So in the United States, the famous and kind of precedent for children in entertainment is called the Coogan Act, named after famed child actor Jackie Coogan, who was in Charlie Chaplin movies as a child. He made the equivalent of millions of dollars today, but when he turned 18, he found out his mother and stepfather had squandered away all his money. He sued them, but he never saw the money in his lifetime. And instead, the state of California, where Hollywood, where the entertainment industry in the United States is located, passed a law that said this money for anything a child earns needs to go into a trust for them to access when they turn 18. The United States has no federal version of the Coogan law, but I believe it's 17 to 19 other states have versions of the Coogan law on the books. And so then when it came to conversations about, well, children of influencers, content creators, family vloggers, the Coogan Act is often what is pointed to as kind of the analogous example of, well, this type of entertainment has it. Why does this type of entertainment not have it? And I think part of that is for reasons we've already discussed. What we're seeing online, family vlogging, content creation, influence, is not considered work yet in the way that acting in a film has long been understood as.
It's really interesting though, because in the law, I think it says that there's stipulations. So it's not just if you appear in your social media. I think it's if you have to be in an X, is it like 30% of the video or online content, and it's just really interesting. I really want to just get your thoughts on the actual enforcement of the act. Like, how is it going to work, or is it working in reality?
That's a great question. And I will admit, I am a bit skeptical on the enforcement of the ad. Oh, sorry, my dogs are starting to bark. Giving you some editing room in the event you need to. Okay. But I am a little bit skeptical of the enforcement of Illinois' law. Do I think it's great? Absolutely. Should it exist? Absolutely. But there's so many slippery slopes and hard to define things in this area, right? So 30% of the video, yes. Well, how are you going to prove the video was shot in Illinois? Since I know for another state I have consulted on in the US for a similar bill, it was, well, the content has to be filmed in the state. Well, how are you going to prove that? Right. So it does become all of these very tricky things. And this is why when I did several interviews last year, when the Illinois law first came out, this has to be the beginning. The Illinois law cannot be the end of the conversation. It has to be the beginning of the conversation to say, for more states, which they are doing, to say, we're not going to stand for this. We are not going to stand for children being financially exploited by their own parents. We're going to protect them. This is going to involve families, legislators, and social media companies working on this as well. Because, who can keep track of these things? Social media companies. I always say if they can build a metaverse, they can figure out how to do this. They just have to prioritize wanting to do it. So what I hope happens is that all of these stakeholders, parents, teachers, politicians, social media companies can get together and can figure out a way to actually help enforce this. Because it's going to be tricky. It's going to be quite difficult. There are going to be ways to skirt around the law, and we would think, parents would, of course, put this money aside if their children are working. But as we saw with Jackie Coogan, that is not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and even, with child actors, you have adult actors now, like Jeanette McCurdy recently with her book even said, there was the Coogan account there, but she's like, it was empty by the time I turned 18. So, there are still ways around it. I think you're right. I think it's a really good starting point. But it does come back to, how do you prove it was filmed in the state? How do you who's measuring that it was exactly 30% or more that they
Right.
featured in?
Mhm.
It's a really interesting one, and I think you're right. It does require a really holistic approach,
Mhm.
because it's almost like you need a union, or an advocacy
Yeah.
group for the children, because otherwise,
Yes.
who's
Mhm.
speaking out on behalf of them?
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where, and kids don't understand the reach of social media, right? Or what their parents could be receiving in benefits from this. And that, they may think it's fun to be in mom or dad's video, right? They may think, oh, well, I want to be on camera. It's fun. I like doing this. And that's great. Like, it is something families can do together. But there's been, some excellent reporting on this, talking to uh, kids who are now 18, so adults who were forced to make content for their parents, and they just tell these horror stories of one individual with chronic illness getting all their illness spells filmed and their mom talking about it on the internet. Children getting their first menstrual cycles filmed and put on the internet. And so where's that line? And it should be up to the parents to know where that line is, that, hey, I probably shouldn't prank my children till they cry or film
Yeah.
their first menstrual period and put them on the internet for millions of people to see, because what's that going to do to them in 15, 20 years when they're an adult and you Google them and that's what comes up is them crying and throwing a temper tantrum. We often talked about a big fear about social media was that it would end innocence, it would end childhood, for, that people would be forced to grow up too quickly because they would be exposed to so much bad stuff out there. And that can still partially be true. But part of it has also meant today's kids are haunted by their childhood forever, right?
Yeah.
If your parent vlogs you and puts you on the internet for everyone to see, if your menstrual period, your first day of school, your dentist surgery is on the internet, well, you graduate college, you try to get a job, someone Googles you, your employer can see all that. So you're haunted by your childhood forever now, instead of having the freedom to grow up and be a kid and leave some of the silly stuff you did behind. I mean, don't get me, like, I was no saint in college. There's partying pictures of me
Yeah.
out there, like there's partying pictures of me out there with the red Solo cups and all that. And I'm just so glad I grew up in an era where I could leave that behind me and it wasn't going to hurt, my employment now. If my
My
employer's
husband and
listening,
I,
sorry,
yeah.
I underage drank.
My husband and I say that all the time. We're like, man, thank
Yeah.
God none of those like
Yeah.
awkward teenage years are on the
Mhm.
internet, because
Yeah.
that would be, that would haunt me.
Yes. And I think today's kids should be allowed to be kids
Yeah.
without the pressure to work, without the pressure to make content. And again, if there's a conversation in the household and everybody's on board, I think that's great.
Yeah.
But if maybe kids don't fully understand the ramifications or the reach, some of that should be reined in. And it is up to parents, first and foremost, to make sure what goes online regarding their children is smart and safe and secure.
Yeah, and it's that tricky thing of, you're relying on parents, but as we know, parents don't always get it right, and sometimes it's not malicious, but sometimes it is malicious.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
how do you protect
absolutely.
those kids?
And I always have to say, at this point, I'm not a parent. I don't have children. And that is by choice. And but if I did have children, doing what I do and knowing what I know, I would never post them online.
Same. Yeah. I
Not in
always say
any
the exact same. Yeah.
capacity.
Absolutely zero pictures
Yeah,
online. It's terrifying.
absolutely. It is. And again, and despite that rather pessimistic statement I just made, my optimistic statement is I do think most people mean well. And I do think most people don't mean to scar their children for life, right? By posting this type of content or forcing them to work. Again, there's horror stories from reporting in the US for Tessa Latifi, who's done some reporting for Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan, has done some really good work on this. And she, and I hope I said her last name right. She's incredible. I'm sorry for Tessa if I said it wrong. But you know, she's done some reporting where kids are essentially bullied and blackmailed and gaslit by their parents, and being like, well, you want nice things, you have to film this so we make money, so we can get paid from this. So that expectation of work is being put on these kids, kind of similar to things, you know, Jet McCurdy and that generation of Nickelodeon kids talked about, of their parents forcing them to work. You have to do this for us. You have to do this, you know, so we can make money and have nice things and have a better home and have a vacation and whatnot. And it's messy. It's very messy. And again, I was talking to someone recently, and they had told me they had spoken with a anti-bullying center. And part of this anti-bullying center talked about families coming up with media plans, like a family media plan about like what everybody in the household can expect regarding like media hours, what gets posted as a family, what gets shared as a family. And I was like, that seems like a great idea. I think that's something that just seems so that everybody is on the same page. Parents and kids are all on the same page about this. So in all of this, I'm not saying kids should never be in their parents' content. I just think it needs to come with a lot of education for all parties involved. And again, something like a media plan where everybody, the ramifications, the reach the implications are being talked about, and everybody is on the same page.
I think the analogy we always use at work is that you wouldn't drop your really young child into the middle of the city and expect them to find their way home. You know, and it's the same with the internet. I'm like, if you just let them loose on the internet, they're going to encounter things they shouldn't see, that they don't understand. Absolutely. And it's just taken that, it's taken that approach that there isn't really such a thing as the online and offline world anymore. It's all completely interconnected.
Absolutely.
And I do think what you said about the Nickelodeon stars, you know, we've seen a lot of those kind of tell-all documentaries now where those child stars are coming out and speaking about just the extreme abuse they suffered. And I do wonder, you know, in another 10, 15 years, are we going to see the same thing with child stars of family vloggers and YouTubers?
1,000%, 1,000%. To some extent, some of it's already starting. I know there was a documentary that's either out or coming out on HBO about this soon. I have to check on that. But because some of these kids who, you know, were forced to do this content in kind of like the heyday of YouTube, 2010 to 2014, are 18 now, and they are beginning to tell their stories and talking, and it's horrific. And I think it also does come on to users too, of like just what casually we engage with online, right? Accounts are only successful and only keep going because people are watching, people are liking, people are clicking and engaging. And who's doing that? We are. So that's another stakeholder group that I didn't mention, is audiences, just people who could be scrolling and see something. And are you going to choose to give that a view? Are you going to choose to engage with that? And you never know who's going to be engaged with that on the other side. In the US, I don't want to name names, but anybody could figure out who I'm talking about. But there's an account of a mom who posts her toddler in some rather suggestive content.
I immediately know who you're talking about.
And her videos have hundreds, if not thousands, of downloads.
That's the scary thing.
Someone download. I know why I download content, because I'm an internet researcher who sometimes has to present on this stuff and, you know, share videos. But most people aren't me. And to be clear, I've never downloaded a video from that person's account. But you have to wonder who's doing that, and also why. And not to even go to the really bad place that where all of our minds are going, just why would anybody need that? Why does anybody need a video of a toddler that isn't their own on their phone? So it's just, you never know what your content is what's gonna happen to your content. And no matter what social media class I teach a couple different types of social media classes at my university. And I said, once you hit publish, you have zero control over what happens to your content. Because the internet is forever. Screenshots exist, screen recordings exist, downloads exist. And so even if you delete it, there's screenshots, things. So the internet is forever, whether that's good or bad. Can be both depending on the situation, I think.
And I think we're just seeing the rise of more parents like you didn't name but mentioned there, who are, I mean, I don't know that it starts from a malicious place. I'm sure it just starts from sharing them casually, but you can't deny that there is money in kids. Like, that's, you know, family vloggers, that is huge money. And I know in the UK there's a family who've done a lot of and they've had been in a couple of documentaries. This is Coney Jolies, who famously vlog every single day. They've vlogged every single day for years and years now. And it's interesting because they started that before they had children, but then continued it with children. I'm like, you know, do your kids know any different? And I guess their argument is, oh, we're showing 20 minutes of a 24-hour day. You know, it's not. It's cultivated. But like that, you know, there's a lot of things where I'm like, you're showing you discipline in your kids, and they're now growing up and going through private things. Like, you know, they'll be getting their first period. I'm like, does that need to be online?
Right. And I don't think anybody ever starts this, and many people probably don't even continue this with malicious intent. You know, in the age of being a content creator, everybody needs their brand, right? We live in a world that tells all of us, have your brand and stick to your brand, right? No matter what it is, no matter what you do for a living, no matter who you are, you have a brand, the things you're known for. And for those people who want to be content creators, right, you really lean into this. And some people figured out kids are a good brand, right? Because there is a market for advice, for seeing that you're not alone in situations. And that can be one of the really good and powerful things about social media, is like learning you're not alone and learning good tips and tricks from people who have been through similar things than you. And I think that's one of the greatest and most powerful things about social media. But again, there's a line, and you can so quickly fall into one side or the other, where kids can go from being your brand to being, well, your brand, like a capital B, right? From something helpful to something exploitive, right? I have heard, this was not a family influencer I talked to, but the highest paid sponsored posts I have ever heard have been $8,000 to $14,000 per post. So we are not talking about small amounts of money here. That's what I think is a misconception, is that people think we're talking about a couple $100 or even a couple $1,000, which is a lot of money, you know. But these are big the money comes from big corporations. The good money comes from corporations. The good money doesn't necessarily come from platforms themselves. The good money comes from corporations. And family vloggers are good content for back to school. They're good content for kids' clothing. They're good content for travel to like amusement parks. And one of the other things, you know, you mentioned this family vlogging channel in the UK. It is also, there's something many of us who study the space kind of refer to as like the influencer life cycle, where you have the young, hip 20-something girl jet setting around the globe, doing the travel thing, doing the beauty thing. Well, then she gets engaged and becomes a wedding influencer, like a planning the wedding and working with those brands. Then they get married, and then they kind of become almost like a home influencer while they're nesting and building their new space together. And then my research actually interestingly came in here when I studied pet influencers, because pets can kind of be a trajectory point on this, where like you're famous for promoting your pet and then have these other milestones. Well, and then having a baby, you can become a pregnancy influencer now. Then you have kids, and now you're set up with an audience who's been with you the whole time to keep on your journey. And now you're a family vlogger. So it actually can happen very naturally, because you have this audience. So that brand, kids being a brand can sometimes either be like a conscious choice from the outset, or something that kind of develops just as people go through natural life stages as social media personalities.
There's so much you said there that I want to delve into a little bit more. It's yeah, it does make me wonder, because it must be, I mean, it shouldn't be a tough situation for parents, but if you're faced with the fact where you're getting, up 14,000 a post,
Yeah.
and then suddenly your child turns around and says, I don't want to do this anymore, it's a huge financial loss. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's suddenly what the family become. It's not about the family anymore and what's best for the family. It becomes a financial decision, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And most people we're talking about who do this full time and don't typically have a day job. Because until you become kind of, going back to what we talked about earlier, until you become big enough, you work your regular 9 to 5 job and then do this as extra. And then any money that comes in as extra is extra. And with the dream being one day you will be able to quit your job and do this full time. And so, yeah, so then if your kid is like, I don't want to do this, things you've quit your job for, things that you have given up are at risk. And so I'm not unsympathetic to that. I mean, I could go off into a whole rant now about how precarious this industry is and how it has no safeguards and doesn't protect people, and the creator industry should be unionized, but it's not.
And the other thing I really wanted to touch on was what you said there. There's a really delicate balance on the internet, I think, where, like you said, you see it as like, it's so nice if you're going through something, say, like I have endo, you can then go online and you can see people who are experiencing that. And it does help you make you feel less alone.
Absolutely.
So I see that with children, but then there's a really delicate balance, I think, particularly with kids who have either physical or mental disabilities. And you see parents where I'm like, I understand you wanting to raise awareness of this, but you've got an even more vulnerable child there who maybe does not have the ability to ever advocate for themselves. And who's protecting them? Like, it's just, how do you decide what's better for the child and what's raising awareness without exploitation?
Absolutely. And again, that is a fine line. And I applaud the people that do it and do it well. Because there are actually some people I think who do walk that line very carefully and very well. I'm thinking of, I had come across this one creator on TikTok a while back, who has a son with a physical disability. It's pretty severe physical disability. And her video that I came across was responding to a comment that had said, well, this person says I should just kill my child because they're a waste of resources and a burden of me and society. And I was like, how awful.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, and I bring this example up, I think the mother handled it, and the mother creator handled it very well. But still, like you mentioned, that vulnerability, you're putting that out there, and people can be horrid. People can be,
and people, a lot of these people are trolls. They're there to get off on provoking people. But you are putting your child at the center of that, and they don't have the same resilience.
Absolutely. And then what if that comment still exists when the child is old enough to see it, one day? What would that do to them then? So even though it is, trolling, and people are deliberately cruel on the internet, often just because they can, again, like you said, should we be dropping our children into a city and just...
Would you just let them, drop them in the middle of New York and be like, get home by yourself?
And I think this is one of those things where I don't think we're never going to put the toothpaste back in the tube. I always go back to that analogy, and we're never going to get kids off the internet. And that's actually not even what I'm advocating for. I think it just needs to be this more holistic approach, this more nuanced understanding of how easily things can slip into exploitation or, helping others. And I think it needs to be a conversation with the whole family once kids are old enough to begin to understand. And again, even my college undergrads don't always fully understand, the reach and the ramifications of the internet. So we do some exercises in class, and one time I surprised them. There was like basically they were students were talking about me in a good way, actually, not in a bad way, but in a good way, on a Reddit forum. And one of my doctoral students saw it and sent it to me. So I came into class and I was like, look.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, somebody in here in this room, because it was talking about, I take this class with Dr. Maddox and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and it was a social media and society class. And so I blurred out the username and you couldn't tell who had done it. But I was like, you never know who's going to see your stuff.
No.
I didn't even go looking for it. All of that to say, even my college undergrads don't always fully understand like the reach and the ramifications and how far and fast these things can go. So it's not just kids that need to know, parents need to learn as well. And I don't even fault them. Again, social media was just unleashed on our lives. We've had to figure it out as we go. But we all could use moments of stepping back, reflecting, and kind of pausing and learning about all the potential implications.
Yeah, it's just it's true what you say. Once anything is out on the internet, that is it. There's just no taking it back. And I think sometimes people fall into the trap of saying, oh, well, I only have, 200 Instagram followers. Even if your account is private, even if your account is locked down, there's nothing to stop one of those followers screenshotting everything, sending it. Like, once it's out there, it is out there forever. And I think that's something people struggle with until something bad happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, this may be getting too psychological for what I do, but I think until we're faced with that permanence of something that did not seem important to us, that we fully grasp it. Because like, obviously the importance of like big moments in our lives, right? We get the permanence of those.
Yeah.
But I fire off a tweet, I'm not thinking about it again after I hit send, especially not thinking about it 10 years later. But it was still there. It was still, it could still come back. So I think we don't often think about the permanence of the inconsequential things or things that seem.
I think Facebook do it every time one of those bloody memories pops up and you're confronted with the stupid statuses you wrote when you were 19.
Oh, yes. I am reminded of all my song lyric Facebook statuses from my emo high school days. I love it.
And I keep trying to, I was explaining to someone, I was like, no, it was different then. You didn't have private message. You had public conversations.
Right. And you poked people.
And you poked people. Yeah. Very problematic.
It was a very different internet, but, even 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. But I think like, I do a lot of work in the child sexual exploitation space, and I think there, and I know that's worst case scenario, and for touch wood, a lot of people, they'll never hopefully experience anything like that. But I do think there's a big education piece for parents, because you can put a photo of a child out there, and I mean, people can locate it to your address in minutes. And it was really interesting recently. I was looking with a friend at ChatGPT, and we took a photo out of our office window, and we just asked, can you tell me where this is? And instantly it could tell us within, I think it was about a half a mile radius of exactly where it was in the city.
That's pretty terrifying.
It's the capability, and technology that's in the infancy stages of AI. So how that's going to then have knock-on impacts is huge. And I think, that particular parent we talked about earlier on TikTok who posts her child, I've seen her make statements and say that she's not the one with the issue. It's the people with a unnatural attraction to the child. I'm like, yes, but your job is to protect the child. And I know we're just seeing more with AI that celebrities in particular, people are able to take their faces and generate child abuse material instantly.
Absolutely.
and there's nothing stopping them using your child in the exact same way. And that's out there forever then.
Absolutely. And again, these are worst case scenarios, but unfortunately, the worst case scenarios happen. And you know, I mean, that mom is correct in the sense that yes, it is other people with the problem, but why make it easier for them?
Yeah.
You know, and what are you getting out of this that is so that you can't give up?
Yeah.
That seems worth it, is the
But I
question
think
I would.
that comes back to what we said, which is most of these parents are the administrators of these accounts, and
Yes.
their children are the breadwinners. It's not the parents often. It's not even the family. It's the kids that bring it. You know, you see the likes of Ryan's World, which my nephews love. And I get it. I get the appeal of it for kids because I'm like, yeah, you're just watching a kid unboxing, you know, thousands of dollars worth of toys. I'm like, looks like a great life. But it just comes back to that financial element, which just feels icky. I can't think of a better word.
And it is. And it's, you know, it's very lucrative. Again, we are not talking about small potato money. For some people, yes, like, because you have to get to that point, right? Like you aren't going to like become a content creator and make $8,000 the next day. But once you get to that point, that's lucrative money. And going back to Jackie Coogan, I think it's important to remember that these children are performing, these children are entertaining. There's a reason why the law is often referred to as, you know, the children's, or in its iterations beyond California, it's often referred to as like the children's entertainment law. And so there's still this disconnect of not putting children in that category. I was fortunate enough at the end of last year to consult actually on California's law that is being introduced to update the Coogan Act to actually include children of influencers in that, basically under that provision that, yes, these are entertainers, they need to be included. So that's one I've been following very closely to see if the Coogan Act can actually get updated in order to fully account for them, because a lot of these this content does occur in California, even influencing and content creation. Yes, people can live all over the world, but often do wind up in California because our entertainment capitals are still there.
Yeah, it's just that idea of, you're right, you're performing and entertaining, which just must give you such a disconnect as a child when you're at home and suddenly you're being expected to turn it on and perform.
You're at work.
It must, because your home is supposed to be that safe space where you just get to be you. It doesn't matter. So to have it also be a business, I just can't imagine what it's like growing up with that.
Yeah. Social media have always kind of collapsed all these boundaries we have: online, offline, physical, digital, personal, private, and then home and work. I mean, and that was something that was, you know, massively accelerated for all of us with the COVID-19 lockdowns around the world. Like, this isn't my house. This is clearly a green screen. I mean, I'm in my house, but I'm also like, every time I do these, I'm like, I'm not going to put my actual house on, you know, video, because for the reasons we've talked about, I don't want it out there for, you know, anybody to try to figure out where I am. Even though I said the city where I live, but that's on Google, you can find that. So there's always just these things. So social media have collapsed these boundaries for all of us. Things that have happened in the world have also collapsed them even further. And I think it's important that we can try to make sure that like one boundary that doesn't collapse, or at least we try our hardest to keep as separate as possible, is kid and adult. That kids don't have to grow up too fast.
Yeah. And I know you touched on it at the very start, the need for that kind of holistic approach, that it's not just on parents, but platforms and technology and legislation. I guess what are, you know, in an ideal world, what would you see the different components being put in place to make it safer for child entertainers?
That's a great question. One, I would see many more state laws passed in this area. And there I am feeling extremely optimistic. I mentioned I've consulted on California. I provided testimony to the U.S. state of Missouri on their child influencer law. And there's several other states. I don't think I can publicly say yet who I've talked to, but like a couple others that I've talked to. And even one state, there are states I haven't talked to that are also still doing this. So I would say, based on my kind of very rough count, there's at least 20 or so US states working on this right now. I know France has passed a lot of laws in this area to protect children on the internet. I believe the UK is working on it or might have already done it. So one, just the laws just need to catch up. Two, I hope that all these laws do provide actual avenues of recourse so that if these kids do turn 18 and their money hasn't been put aside, you never want to think of a child suing their parents, but if it came to it, I hope these children get compensated for what they had to deal with. And I'm no lawyer, but any child out there that needs help with that, I will help you. I can help point you in the right direction or be an advocate for you. So that's kind of one, is the laws. Two, I think we need education in schools, and we need education for adults too, again, the ramifications and the implications. And social media platforms themselves need to be willing to take a stand and say, you know, we can, social media platforms have more data on us than any of us would ever feel comfortable knowing. They can tell us where something at least was uploaded. You know, they can come up with a tool that measures how long a child is in a video for, right? You know, like platforms, and the platforms themselves can also maybe, you know, not monetize content themselves, you know, maybe make it less lucrative to pay out. So there's a lot of different things that could happen for various stakeholders involved to come together and actually make this a safer place, social media a safer place, and being in social media content a safer experience for children.
And I think the other one that I know we talked about earlier is also us as the audience, you know, to really think about what are you engaging with and why.
Absolutely.
And who's at the heart of that? Is there a child at the heart of it? And do you need to be engaging with it?
Absolutely. And I always tell my undergrads when we get to ethics day, so we spend half the class talking about kind of like the ethics of tech, like you are giving up all this data. But then in the second half of the class, I always pivot to your ethics as users, like filming people without their consent in public and uploading.
Why has that become a thing? Yeah.
I don't know why we are so willing to survey each other, but that's a whole other thing. I'll come back another time. We can talk about
that's a whole 1984 discussion.
Right. But then too, what are you watching? What are you consuming? And even just through consuming, are you feeding into something problematic? Because a view, for better or worse, is encouragement, right? A view of something, an engagement, like a click, a like, doesn't always necessarily mean the person liked it. Maybe they were watching out of curiosity, but what the creator is going to see on the other side is just the ticking up of numbers. And that reinforces the behavior. So I think that is hugely important for us to think about, of what we are engaging with. So like I actually block, I have, my TikTok algorithm is very weird given doing what I do for a living. So oftentimes I have like my own interest, and then I have like all the various things I keep tabs on, you know, that pop up too. And, you know, of course, children and internet content being one. And I've had to block many parents who, including that one we've talked about, because I don't want to engage. I don't want to contribute to that cycle of views. Even if I see it in scroll, you know, I don't want to feed into it at all. So I just have learned to kind of block some of them off my feed, so I'm not even inadvertently contributing to what's going on.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I block quite a lot of people because I just don't want to engage at all with it and encourage any of the engagement with it. Absolutely. Do you think, I mean, I think, like we said, it's unrealistic to think children will never be on social media. just not the way the world is now. It's
Right.
social media is intrinsic to how we go about our lives. Is
Mhm.
there a way to safely put your children on social media, do you think?
That's a great question. And I think within the realm of things we can control, absolutely.
Mm,
Um, I think, that it should be conversations between families, again, about what we expect, what we share, what we post before a child is maybe old enough to kind of understand. I would just be careful if, again, you have a beautiful baby you want to share.
yeah.
Maybe go back to email if you really want to share them widely. Use um, close friends stories. Again, that could still be shared beyond just your close friends, but I'd like to think if somebody's on your close friends list, they probably won't betray your trust, hopefully, right? There's a lot of X factors and things we can't control for, but take advantage of the privacy tools that are already in place on social media. And it can be safe within what we can control. There are a whole host of things we can't,
Yeah.
right? People always ask me like, well, how do we fix the internet? I was like, well, we can't fix the internet because we have to fix society first.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah.
That all of the problems we see online are offline problems that are just exacerbated and amplified by what technology lets us do. So we have a bajillion, that's my technical professional term, scientific, actual world problems to fix we have bad behavior to fix offline before we can even think about fixing bad behavior online. And it's all like things like that are always going to happen, right? But we can, like you said, not just drop our kids in a city and expect them to find their way home. We
Yeah.
can keep our arm around them, shield them from some of the things that are out there, take, specific streets home, bring an umbrella if it's going to rain. We can mitigate a lot of the things that can make our
Yeah.
experiences bad and uncomfortable for us. We just have to be willing to choose those features, engage with them, and talk honestly with our families about what we all expect and want out of social media use.
Yeah, I think communication and education is just so essential for the entire family. And
Absolutely.
it's funny, that idea of, you're right, like what we see in, day-to-day life is completely replicated online. And
Mhm.
it just makes me laugh because I think, years ago, you had celebrities who would, like I'm thinking like Michael Jackson always had masks on his kid's face, and it
Yeah.
was this
Mhm.
weird thing. And why would you do it? It's so strange. And now most people sticker their children's faces
Yes.
when they're putting them
Mhm.
on. So
With
it's just
emojis.
really interesting, that evolution of,
Yeah. And I
thoughts of
think,
Michael Jackson aside, but
yeah,
that idea of, yeah, you need to protect their anonymity in whatever way you can.
absolutely. And I have, several friends with kids who will post their kids. Again, that's their choice. But like if they post a picture of like a child's birthday party, they make sure they put the stickers over all the other kids' face because they understand I have consented and maybe my child even understands that their picture is here, but all these other people haven't. So I think that's always a really good idea too, is that if there's other kids in your photo, to just be mindful and know that other people and other families' social media use and preferences could be very different from your own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see it. I've quite a few friends who are teachers. And I don't know if it's the same in the States, but in Ireland in particular, you have Facebook groups that, for the school, like the school will have a Facebook
I
page.
believe that
Yeah,
exists,
and they
yeah.
promote, they went on a trip, this is what they're doing in class. And I always find it really interesting that so many parents are comfortable with their kids' photos being put on
Yeah,
Facebook.
yeah.
And I did ask my friend recently, and she's like, oh, like, some of the older teenagers, if they're not comfortable, we'll just, they'll step out of the photos. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, again, comes back to that education. Like, do parents and young people really understand how far content
Mhm.
can go? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've kind of talked through a couple things, and there is a huge difference between just like a regular parent sharing the picture of their kid to their 20 followers versus a family vlogger account with millions of followers. But that being said, you still don't know, even
Yeah.
among your 20 followers, what could happen. So there's there's the share, it's a spectrum, right? Of you're sharing just your kid online to your friends all the way up to millions of followers, thousands of dollars of compensation, social media as work, and so on and so on.
Well, I think personally we've solved it. So
yeah, there we go.
There we go. I think we've solved it. Just leave me and you in charge. We'll fix it.
There we go. Sleep easy tonight.
Jess, thank you so much. I mean, it's a heavy conversation for first thing in the morning, but I just am fascinated by, the work and online safety and, just the reach of social media and family vloggers. I think we're probably, unfortunately, might see it get a little bit worse before it gets better, but I do think we're starting to move in the right direction.
I think so. Tomorrow in the US, so by the time this airs, we'll already have seen how this happens. They're trying to pass a Kids Online Safety Act, which is a bad bill for a whole host of reasons. So I'm hoping by the time this airs, the bill has been killed. And it's a bad bill just because I think it's going to get into censorship for what kids see online. But again, and I brought that up because there's just so many things. There's so many things about the internet and the world and privacy and being online. All interconnected. Absolutely. And, and we need to regulate things, but we need to be smart about it. And we need to be realistic about it. And we need to not engage in censorship about it. So
and also future-proof it and not try and, put in legislation for what's happening, but what could happen.
I just saw right before I hopped on this with you again in the US, by the time this airs, we'll have had a US presidential debate this week.
Oh, yes.
And I saw Instagram has now auto made it so you're limited in seeing political content on Instagram for everybody.
Interesting.
In the US. And I'm like, you mentioned future proofing, and I'm like, that's not a sustainable solution. Just to be, and also let people look at politics. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, we could just dig into a whole other.
I know we could. I'll come back sometime. We'll talk more.
Thank you so much, Jess. It's been amazing chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.